The story starts with a tragedy that the wizarding world never sees coming. In the middle of the night, a fire tears through number 4 Privet Drive. It is not caused by a curse or a wand, but by a simple broken gas line. The Dursleys are gone before the smoke even reaches the 2nd floor. Inside the cupboard under the stairs, 5-year-old Harry Potter wakes up to the sound of roaring heat. He sits perfectly still in the dark. He does not know that the flames are avoiding his cupboard door as if they are afraid of him. He only knows that he is alone. Albus Dumbledore arrives before the fire department. He moves through the smoke with ease and finds the boy. Dumbledore realizes in this moment that the blood protection from Harry's mother is now dead. As long as the world knows Harry is alive, he is a target for the dark forces still hiding in the shadows. Dumbledore makes a hard decision. He carries the boy out of the ruins and tells himself that for Harry to survive, the boy who lived must die. He decides to erase Harry Potter from history. With a complex, heavy wave of his wand, Dumbledore severs the Trace, the Ministry's magical tether to underage wizards. Deep within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Harry Potter's magical signature simply blinks out of existence. He is officially a ghost. Dumbledore takes the boy to a cold grey part of London. He stands before the iron gates of St. Jude's Orphanage. The building is tall, dark, and smells of rain and old stone. Dumbledore does not use Harry's real name. He uses magic to confuse the staff, making them believe that Harry is just another child found in the wreckage of a fire with no family left. He leaves no letters and no instructions. Dumbledore looks at the boy one last time and silently asks for forgiveness, believing that total isolation is the only way to keep him safe until he is old enough to fight. The heavy doors shut. Harry is led down a long, quiet hallway by a woman who does not look back to see if he is following. He is no longer a hero. He is just a number in a system that does not care about him. The 6 years at St. Jude's are defined by the heavy presence of Rory. Rory is 14, a boy with a thick build and messy brown hair, who towers over the other orphans. He is the unofficial king of the grey hallways. To Rory, Harry is the perfect target, small, silent, and never willing to fight back. Rory makes it his mission to ensure Harry never feels full. He waits in the cafeteria to swipe Harry's bread and trips him in the corridors for no reason other than to see the boy hit the stone floor. Harry accepts this as his reality. He keeps his head down and lets the tightness in his chest grow, never realizing that his body is absorbing every bit of anger and storing it like a battery. The only person who makes the silence bearable is Lydia. She is a few years older than Harry, with dark red hair and a kind face that feels familiar to him. She arrived 2 years ago, and Lydia is the only one who doesn't look at Harry with pity or fear. She shares her meagre rations with him and whispers stories of a world outside the grey walls. She is the anchor that keeps Harry from drifting away entirely. On the morning of July 31st, Harry's 11th birthday, the air in the orphanage feels different. It is thick and heavy, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Harry wakes up feeling a strange heat behind his eyes. Lydia finds him in a quiet corner of the yard. She has a bright look in her eyes and pulls a small crumpled paper bag from her pocket. Inside is a tiny lopsided cake she has spent weeks saving her copper coins to buy. It is the first gift Harry has ever received. For a moment, the tightness in his chest softens. He looks at Lydia, and for the first time in years, he feels like a person instead of a ghost. But the moment is shattered by a shadow. Rory appears, laughing at the sight of the small cake. Before Harry can react, Rory reaches out and swats the cake from Harry's hands. It hits the dirt, ruined and covered in grit. The heat in Harry's chest doesn't just soften now, it vanishes, replaced by cold, violent pressure. He doesn't yell, he doesn't move, he simply stares at Rory. Suddenly, Rory's laughter turns into a gasp of terror. His face begins to redden, his arms and legs start to swell, his clothes straining against his skin. Within seconds, Rory is no longer a boy. He is a massive rounded shape, groaning as he begins to lift off the ground like a grotesque balloon. The other children scream and scatter. Harry watches in horror. He looks at his own hands, terrified of the invisible power that has just turned a human being into a monster. He looks at Lydia, her face is pale, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and fear. Harry realizes that he cannot stay. He turns and bolts for the iron gates. He doesn't look back at the building, only at Lydia's shrinking figure as he disappears into the crowded, wet, sleek streets of London. Harry runs until his lungs burn and his legs feel like lead. He finds himself in the heart of London, away from the grey walls of St. Jude's. He finds a way into an abandoned tube station, a place where the train stopped running decades ago. He stays there for 2 days, hiding in the cold darkness. He has no bed, no coat, and no food. By the 3rd day, the hunger is a sharp claw in his stomach. He is forced out into the light to look for food. He wanders the streets, his clothes torn and dirty. He approaches restaurants and cafes, but the owners look at him with a disgust and turn him away before he can even ask for help. Deeper in the city, down a narrow alley, he finds a pub called the White Horse. It is old and smells of wood smoke and spilled ale. Near the back bins, Harry finds the remains of a meal. He is so hungry he doesn't care where it came from. A woman in her late 50s, the owner of the pub, walks out the back door and catches him. She doesn't yell. She looks at his thin face and his bright green eyes and sees a boy who has been forgotten. She brings him a plate of warm food and tells him that many boys sleep on these streets. She introduces herself as Sandra and makes him a deal. If he helps her sweep the floors and clear the tables, she will feed him every night. For the next few weeks, Harry returns to the pub. He works hard, his hands getting calloused and his stomach finally full. One night, back in the silence of the abandoned station, he lights a small candle. He sits in the flickering light and finally thinks about the feeling he had on his birthday. He remembers the heat and the way the air seemed to bend around him. He holds a copper coin in his hand and tries to find that feeling again. He digs deep into the center of his chest, pushing past the fear. He feels the magic rise like a tide. It is no longer a fever, it is a current of energy. He focuses on the coin. In a blink, the coin vanishes from his left hand and appears in his right. He does it again and again. Harry remembers seeing a magician on the street near Covent Garden, watching people throw money into a hat for simple card tricks. He realizes that what he has is better than any trick. The next day, he goes to Sandra at the White Horse and shows her what he can do. He makes her keys float an inch off the bar and turns a napkin into a paper bird that looks as if it actually flutters its wings. The woman is shocked and thinks it's the best illusion she has ever seen. She sees a way to bring more customers into her pub. She tells Harry he can perform for 30 minutes every weekend. She promises to pay him £5 a night. For Harry, £5 feels like a fortune. The next 2 years pass in a blur of hard work and secret practice. By the time he is 13, Harry is no longer the scared boy from the cupboard. He is lean, quiet, and incredibly fast, all things he mastered from growing up on the streets. He performs at the White Horse every weekend. The regulars call him the Boy Wonder, but no one knows his real name. He learns to control the tide in his blood, making it move with a flick of his fingers. He doesn't just do tricks anymore, he manipulates the world around him. He is careful with every penny he earns. He hides his money in a metal box beneath the floorboards of the tube station. He is saving for something specific. He is saving for a real life. He wants to buy a set of forged documents, a passport and a birth certificate, under a new name. He wants a small apartment where the doors actually lock. He is building a wall between himself and his past. He has no idea that while he is saving for a life in the Muggle world, the Wizarding world is falling apart. Without Harry Potter, Voldemort's shadow is beginning to grow longer. Harry is now 13, and his show is the highlight of the weekend at the White Horse. He moves with a quiet confidence that makes him seem older than he is. To the Muggles in the pub, he is a master of sleight of hand. He makes coins dance across his knuckles and disappear into thin air. He makes a deck of cards fly from one hand to the other like a living snake. The regulars cheer and toss extra coins into his hat. They think it's just a very good trick. Harry smiles, but his eyes remain sharp and observant. He is constantly checking the room, a habit learned from years on the street. At the back of the room, sitting in the darkest corner, is a man who doesn't cheer. He wears a heavy, tattered coat and holds a glass of water he hasn't touched. He watches Harry's hands with a strange, intense focus. When the show ends and the crowd thins out, the man approaches the bar. Harry is counting his earnings when the stranger stops beside him. The man speaks in a low, tired voice. He asks Harry why a boy of his talent isn't at Hogwarts. He warns Harry that performing magic so openly in front of Muggles is dangerous. and could get him in serious trouble with the authorities. Harry looks at the man, completely lost. He has no idea what the word Hogwarts means. He assumes the man is talking about a magician's school or a government agency for street performers. Harry tells the man he doesn't know what he's talking about. He explains that these are just tricks he practices to keep from starving. He says he isn't part of any Hogwarts and just wants to be left alone to do his job. The stranger looks at Harry for a long time. A look of sad understanding crosses his face. He tells Harry that he understands why he would lie. He says that since the Dark Lord Voldemort returned to power, the world has become a terrifying place for young people. The man mentions the tragedy from the year before, the death of the young Weasley girl at the school. He says that after what happened to her, many families are hiding their children and refusing to send them to Hogwarts this year. He tells Harry that his secret is safe and that he won't report him for using magic in the pub. The man leaves a gold coin on the bar, a currency Harry has never seen before, and walks out into the night. Harry is left standing in the middle of the pub, holding the heavy gold coin. His mind is racing. He has spent 2 years thinking he was a freak or a miracle in a normal world. Now a stranger has suggested there is a whole school for people like him. The name Voldemort sends a cold shiver down Harry's spine, though he doesn't know why. He realizes that the real life he was saving for might be much more dangerous than he ever imagined. The world he tried to hide from is finally starting to bleed into his own. Another year passes. Harry still lives in the tunnels, still performs at the White Horse, but his focus has shifted. The gold coin the stranger left behind becomes an obsession. He spends his days in public libraries, searching through books on ancient currencies and historical coins. But he finds nothing that matches the strange metal. He tried to spend it once at a pawnbroker, but the man behind the counter looked at the coin with a sudden glassy-eyed confusion and handed it back to Harry, unable to process what it was. Harry realized the coin itself is protected by magic. He keeps it in his pocket constantly, a heavy reminder that there is a door he hasn't found the key to yet. It is July 31st again, Harry's 15th birthday. He is walking near a library in central London when he bumps into a young woman carrying a stack of books. It is Lydia. She looks different, older, healthier, her red hair pulled back neatly. She had left St. Jude's on her 16th birthday and is now living in a halfway house for girls, working a part-time job and taking night classes. They walk together through the rainy streets, reconnecting. As they talk about the past, Harry feels a chill. When the subject of his running away comes up, Lydia smiles sadly. She remembers Rory, the bully, squashing Harry's birthday cake into the dirt. Harry realizes she thinks he ran away out of heartbreak and anger. She has absolutely no memory of Rory inflating like a balloon, or the terrifying display of accidental magic that actually caused Harry to flee. Harry realizes with a sickening jolt that someone has been inside her head. Someone wiped her memory of that day to cover his tracks. The rain gets heavier, driving them to look for shelter. Lydia spots a tiny, grubby-looking pub sandwiched between a bookshop and a record store. The sign above the door is chipped, reading The Leaky Cauldron. They step inside. The air is thick with pipe smoke and a strange, heavy atmosphere. The patrons are cloaked in shadows, nursing peculiar drinks. Everyone stops talking in unison and stares at them. Before Harry and Lydia can reach the bar, a loud commotion breaks out near the stairs, shouting and the sound of breaking glass. Terrified, Harry grabs Lydia's hand and pulls her toward the back door to escape the fight. They find themselves in a tiny, dead-end courtyard containing only a dustbin and a blank brick wall. Trapped between the commotion inside and the wall, Harry feels the familiar tide of magic rise in his blood, amplified by the panic. He places his hands desperately against the cold bricks. He feels a pulse of energy jump from the gold coin in his pocket to the wall. The bricks instantly begin to wriggle. A small hole appears in the centre, expanding rapidly as the bricks fold themselves away to the side, creating a wide archway. Harry stares in shock, but Lydia simply steps through the archway. She doesn't react to the impossible sight of a solid wall melting away. It is as if her brain simply refuses to register the magic happening inches from her face. They step inside into a different world. The grey, rainy London is gone, replaced by cobblestone streets bathed in warm light. The air smells of strange spices, burning parchment, and something sweet and metallic. They walk down the streets, their eyes wide. They see cauldrons stacked outside shops, owls hooting in cages, and robes shimmering in shop windows. Harry has never seen anything like it. Lydia is equally amazed. Harry watches her and thinks to himself that she interprets it through the only lens she understands. She probably thinks they have stumbled upon an elaborate hidden theatrical district or a movie set. Lydia stops in front of a narrow, dusty shop. A single wand lies on a faded purple cushion in the window. The gold letters above the door are peeling. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. Lydia's eyes light up. She tells Harry this is perfect for his act, a real magician's prop shop. Before he can stop her, she grabs his hand and pulls him inside. A tinkling bell rings somewhere in the depths of the shop. The space is tiny, empty, and smells heavily of dust and old wood. Shelves packed with long, thin boxes reach the ceiling. From the darkness of the back room, an old man glides forward. His eyes are wide and pale, shining like moons in the dim light. He doesn't look at the dusty floor or the strange clothes Harry is wearing. He looks directly at the lightning bolt scar hidden beneath Harry's hair. The man's voice is a soft whisper that seems to vibrate in the air. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter." Harry steps back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hasn't heard that name in 10 years. He wants to ask how this stranger knows him, but his throat is dry. Beside him, Lydia is smiling, her eyes bright with curiosity. She must think this is all part of a show, a brilliant bit of acting by the shopkeeper in a hidden part of the city. Ollivander does not reach for a tape measure. He does not search the shelves. He moves with a singular purpose to a specific shelf and pulls down a thin, dusty box. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander murmurs, sliding the lid off. 11 inches, nice and supple. He holds the wand out. Harry hesitates, looking at the dark, polished wood. He slowly reaches out and takes it. The moment his fingers close around the handle, the room changes. The cold, damp feeling of the London streets vanishes. A sudden, violent warmth rushes up Harry's arm, spreading through his chest like wildfire. It is the tide he felt in the tube station, but now it has a direction. It has a voice. A stream of brilliant red and gold sparks erupts from the end of the wand, dancing like miniature stars against the dark shelves. A sudden wind sweeps through the small shop, fluttering the pages of old books and causing the lamps to flicker. Lydia watches in amazement, a wide smile on her face. She leans against the counter, with a face that says the special effects in this shop are better than anything she has ever seen before. She looks at Harry, proud of him, believing he has finally found the perfect prop for his magic shows. But Harry isn't looking at Lydia, he is looking at the wand. For the first time in his life, the pressure in his chest is gone. The fever has found its home. Ollivander leans over the counter, his pale eyes unblinking. He tells Harry that he is curious he should be destined for this wand, when its brother, the wand that gave him the scar, belongs to the man who is currently tearing the world apart. Harry looks at the old man, the wand still humming in his hand. He realizes that this isn't a trick, and it isn't a performance. The stranger in the pub was right. There is a war happening in the shadows, and whether he wants to be or not, Harry Potter is somehow connected to it. The peace of the wand shop is suddenly shattered. The front door doesn't just open, it is blown off its hinges by a blast of dark light. 2 figures in long black robes and silver masks storm inside. They move with a violent, jagged energy that feels wrong to look at. Before Harry can even raise his new wand, the taller figure points a piece of wood at him. Harry feels a sensation unlike anything he has ever known. It is as if his blood has suddenly turned to ice. His muscles lock, his breath catches in his throat. He is frozen in place like a statue. Beside him, Lydia is caught in the same invisible trap, her face twisted in a look of silent terror. Harry's mind is screaming, but his body is a cage. He can only watch as the masked man walks towards him. The man suddenly gives a double take. He then reaches out with a gloved hand and brushes the hair from Harry's forehead. The Death Eater's hand stops. He stares at the lightning bolt scar. The silence in the shop becomes heavy and suffocating. The man's masked head tilts to the side, and Harry can see his eyes through the silver slits. They are wide with a sudden pale realization. The masked man stumbles back, his voice shaking as he mutters to his partner. He realizes he isn't looking at a stray street kid. He is looking at a ghost. He is looking at the boy who was supposed to have died in a fire 10 years ago. The Death Eaters don't move to kill him. They look like they're about to run and tell their master the impossible news. The shop window behind the Death Eaters shatters into 1,000 diamonds. A massive explosion of smoke and red light fills the room, knocking the masked men off their feet and breaking the spell on Harry and Lydia. Harry collapses to the floor, gasping for air as the ice in his veins melts. Through the swirling smoke, 3 figures leap into the shop. They are tall with bright red hair that stands out against the darkness of their heavy combat-worn cloaks. They move with a synchronized professional speed. One of them hits the first Death Eater with a bolt of blue light that sends him crashing into the shelves. The other 2 provide cover, their wands flashing in the dim light. The 3 boys stand over Harry. 2 of them look identical, Fred and George, but they aren't smiling. Their faces are scarred and set in grim expressions. The 3rd boy, Ron, is the youngest, but he has a hardness in his eyes that suggests he has seen too much death for someone so young. Ron looks at Harry. For a split second, his eyes widen just like the Death Eaters did. But he doesn't freeze. He leans down, grabs Harry by the shoulder, and pulls him to his feet. Fred and George grab a confused Lydia. Ron speaks quickly and urgently. He tells Harry and Lydia that they have to move right now. He says the Ministry will be swarming the alley in seconds, and that they are the only chance Harry has of staying alive. He points towards the back of the shop and tells them to run. Harry doesn't argue. He can feel the dark energy in the air, the sense of a world that is actively hunting him. He grabs Lydia's hand, feeling her trembling, and follows the 3 red-headed brothers into the shadows. As they burst out the back of the shop, Harry looks back one last time. Ollivander is gone, vanished into the ruins of his store. The real life Harry has been saving for, the apartment, the fake documents, the quiet safety, is gone. They navigate a labyrinth of shifting side alleys, the red-headed brothers casting heavy, obscuring charms to mask their retreat from the Ministry's approaching censors. Harry is forced to utilize every street-learned reflex to keep pace, his shoes slick with the grease and rain of the city. They reach a nondescript, rusted service door in the shadows of a railway bridge, which Ron opens with a complex, silent series of wand movements. They descend into the deep, forgotten arteries of the city, moving through a series of pressurized airlocks and magically reinforced tunnels. The cold, damp air of the surface is gradually replaced by a dry, sterile heat as they penetrate the final layer of the hidden bunker. The underground station functions as a hive of quiet, desperate activity, serving as the nerve center of a dying world. Harry navigates the tunnels, passing people who look completely ordinary, men in trench coats and teenagers in hoodies, huddled over glowing tactical maps that shimmer in the dim light. Ron notices Harry's confusion and stops walking to quietly explain that these people are squibs, the invisible ghosts of the magical world, who were born into wizarding families but possess no power of their own. He tells Harry that because the Dark Lord views them as less than human, they are never suspected, allowing them to serve as the hidden eyes and ears of the Resistance. Harry then observes the veterans of the war, a man with a scarred face and a spinning prosthetic eye, and a tired-looking man sitting beside a woman with bright bubblegum pink hair. In the shadows of a rusted service pillar, Harry notices a man standing alone with sunken cheeks, tattered clothes, and a wild, hollowed-out eyes. The man watches Harry pass with an expression of such raw recognition that Harry's hand instinctively goes to his hidden scar. He turns to share the unsettling moment with Lydia, but his stomach drops when he realizes she is no longer walking beside him. He follows the sound of low, urgent voices toward a heavy door at the end of the corridor. From behind the door, Harry overhears the measured, authoritative voice of an elderly man questioning a girl who sounds like she is defending herself. The man's voice expresses a cold concern about Harry's presence here. He presses about Harry's temperament, questioning if years of isolation have turned him into another version of Voldemort. The silence is shattered when Ron Weasley steps forward, his voice loud and deliberate as he announces Harry's presence outside the door. The door opens to reveal Lydia and Dumbledore, their faces frozen in the look of observers caught in an uncomfortable truth. Seeing the look of pure cold betrayal on Harry's face, Ron quietly asks to speak with the ex-headmaster alone in the corridor. Dumbledore agrees, stating he will give Harry and Lydia a moment to speak, before stepping out and closing the door. Left alone with the girl he once considered his only anchor, Harry finally lets the silence break. He goes on a low, trembling rant, realizing that every major moment of his life, from the shared rations at the orphanage to the chance meeting at the library, was a calculated ploy to see if he was another Dark Lord. He feels the tide in his blood, the same violent, explosive energy he felt when he blew up the bully at the orphanage, welling up inside his chest. He desperately tries to tame the feeling before it bubbles over, wrestling with a power that now feels like an enemy. Lydia is speaking, her voice desperate as she tries to explain, but Harry can no longer hear her. The world around him begins to get muffled and blurry. The room seems to tilt as the pressure behind his eyes becomes unbearable. He sees Lydia's face shift from defensive anger to a look of sudden, sharp terror in seconds. She turns and shouts for help as Harry's knees buckle. Dumbledore bursts back into the room, his hand outstretched, but before he can reach Harry, Harry's vision fails entirely. Harry falls to the cold stone floor, the impact of the ground the last thing he feels before everything goes black. In the heavy absolute silence of the darkness, a new sound emerges. It is a chilling, high-pitched voice that seems to vibrate through his very soul. "The boy who lived," the voice whispers with a terrifying cold satisfaction. "I have been looking for you." Harry wakes to the rhythmic hum of air filtration fans, the high, chilling voice from his vision finally receding into the back of his mind. He finds himself in a small, sterile room deep within the bunker, where the light is clinical and the air carries the heavy, dry scent of reinforced concrete. Albus Dumbledore sits by the bedside, his shadow stretching long and thin against the walls like a silent sentinel. The old man watches Harry with an intense, quiet focus, allowing a heavy silence to hang between them before finally breaking the tension. Dumbledore mentions Harry's instinctive ability to manipulate magic without a wand, noting that while such a talent exists, it is an extraordinary feat for a boy left to survive on the streets. The praise causes the tide in Harry's blood to rise with a fresh wave of anger, as he realizes he has been an object of study for a very long time. He thinks of Lydia, re-evaluating every shared meal at the orphanage, as a piece of a cold, calculated betrayal. Harry looks directly at the man who pulled the strings of his life, and demands to know how long he has been hiding in the shadows. Dumbledore admits that Harry was never truly out of his sight, confirming that Lydia was placed at the orphanage specifically to act as his guardian. He reveals they only lost track of him for 2 years, until a contact spotted him performing his tricks at the White Horse pub. Harry's resentment boils over as he questions if Lydia's kindness was merely a job, but Dumbledore's expression turns sharp and cold, warning Harry that he has crossed the line. He informs Harry that Lydia's story and her sacrifices are our own to tell, and they are not secrets for him to give away. When Harry demands to leave the tunnels immediately, Dumbledore informs him that he must remain underground until the Order decides his fate. Harry asks if they are simply waiting to see if he is destined to become another Dark Lord. Dumbledore meets his gaze with a faint, enigmatic twinkle in his eye, offering a simple maybe before leaving the room. The days bleed into weeks. To pass the time and map the layout of his new prison, Harry begins to wander into the deeper veins of the station, until he finds himself in a large, hollowed-out cavern where the tracks once met. He notices a crowd already gathering, the air thick with a restless, electric energy as people congregate around a raised central platform. As Harry leans against the cold stone of the tunnel entrance to watch, a shadow detaches itself from the darkness beside him. It is the man with the sunken cheeks and wild eyes he noticed upon his arrival, Sirius Black, though he looks more trimmed and put together than he did in the shadows of the infirmary. Sirius doesn't look at Harry with the clinical curiosity of Dumbledore or the pity of the others. He looks at him with a raw, desperate sort of pride. He tells Harry that he knew his father, and that James Potter would have been just as restless in a cage like this. He explains that this is the dueling arena, a place where the students showcase what they have learned and blow off a little steam in a grand, violent spectacle. Sirius notes the contrast in their worlds. While Harry learned magic to survive and perform, these people use it as a sharp, polished blade. Sirius gestures towards the platform, his voice low and raspy, as he begins to break down the mechanics of the fight unfolding before them. He points out Ron Weasley, the challenger, who fights with a desperate, brawling energy, but Sirius warns that Ron's tendency to use anger as a shield is dangerous, as a shield made of rage eventually cracks. On the opposite side stands Cedric Diggory, the reigning champion, who moves with a grace Harry can barely follow. Cedric doesn't just cast spells, he weaves them, deflecting Ron's attacks with effortless flicks of his wrist while remaining calm and focused. Sirius tells Harry to watch Cedric's feet, explaining that true magic isn't just about the wand, but about the balance of the body and the stillness of the mind. The duel is intense, with Ron throwing stunning spells and bursts of fire, but Cedric moves like a dancer, predicting every move before it's made. With a final blinding flash of golden light, Cedric disarms Ron, yet immediately offers a hand to help him up. Sirius leans in closer, whispering that Harry's Street Mage instincts are actually a form of combat that purebloods have forgotten. He tells Harry that if he wants to survive what is coming, he needs to stop hiding the tide in his blood and start sharpening it into a weapon. Sirius offers that he and Lupin will take over Harry's training personally, promising to help him master the power he has carried alone for so long, provided Harry chooses to stay. Harry watches from the shadows, and for the first time his anger begins to fade as he realizes magic can be more than a burden or a trick for coins. It can be a language and a craft. He looks at his holy wand and realizes how much more powerful he could be if he understood the rules. He is tired of being the one who is watched, tired of being the ghost. He decides then and there to stop running and start studying, vowing to become better than Cedric, and a wizard that even Voldemort will have to fear. A few months pass in the damp, humming silence of the underground. Harry throws himself into his studies with Sirius and Lupin with a clinical focus. He consumes books on hexes, ancient charms, and defensive theory as if they are bread he used to scavenge for. He makes rapid progress, his Street Mage instincts allowing him to grasp the flow of magic faster than those who grew up with it. But as his skills grow, so does his frustration. He asks to join the Dueling Club, to test himself against Cedric or the older students, but the answer is always the same: no. To the Order, he is a relic, a fragile glass prince who must be kept safe at all costs, though Harry doesn't understand why. Apart from Sirius and Lupin, Harry's only other real connection is Ron. They spend long nights in the hollowed-out tunnels, bonded by a shared silence and the weight of what they have lost. Ron is a boy made of jagged edges and trauma, his temper always a second away from boiling over. He still speaks of his sister, Ginny, in the present tense, catching himself only when the silence reminds him she is gone. Harry understands the fire in Ron's eyes. It is the same heat that once burned in the cupboard under the stairs. They don't talk about their feelings, they talk about the war. Ron doesn't treat Harry like a relic or a glass prince. He treats him like a fellow survivor. Ron mentions Lydia's name, watching as Harry immediately turns away to hide the fresh surge of resentment. Ron speaks of the suffocating silence Ginny left behind, admitting he would trade everything for a single minute to say the things he never got to say. He warns Harry that in their world, every conversation carries the weight of potentially being the last. Ron explains the invisible burden Lydia carries as a squib, living in a world of magic she can see but never touch. He reveals that taking Harry to the wand shop wasn't a calculated order from Dumbledore, but a choice Lydia made entirely on her own. She stood by and watched Harry obtain the one thing she is destined never to have, all because her belief in him is stronger than her own loss. Ron leaves the tunnel without waiting for an answer, his footsteps echoing against the damp stone. Harry remains in the shadows, staring into the dark as he begins to weigh Ron's words against the cold knot of anger in his chest. Lydia has been a ghost in Harry's life. He sees her in the distance, working with the Squib network, but every time she approaches to apologize, he turns away. The sting of her betrayal as a knot in his chest he refuses to untie. That changes in the dead of night. Harry is jolted awake by a hand over his mouth. It is Lydia. Her face is pale and her voice is sharp with a terrifying urgency. She tells him to get up and follow her. She doesn't explain until they are deep in the service tunnels. She tells him the Death Eaters have finally traced his past. They found the White Horse. They found Sandra, the woman from the pub who gave him a chance when he was starving. They move through the city like shadows, slipping through the back alleys Harry once called home. They sneak into the pub through the cellar entrance. The air inside, once smelling of warm ale and wood smoke, now smells of ozone and fear. In the centre of the dark room, Sandra sits frozen in a chair. Her eyes are wide, filled with a silent, screaming terror. 3 Death Eaters sit at a nearby table, their masks discarded, laughing as they talk about the little performer they are waiting for. He begins to crawl towards her, his holly wand gripped tight, intending to cut her loose and vanish back into the night. A floorboard creaks. One of the Death Eaters turn, his eyes locking onto Harry's. Harry doesn't wait, he doesn't freeze. He explodes into motion. He rises with a grace that shocks even Lydia. He doesn't use the stiff, formal movements he was taught in the underground. He moves like a street fighter. He sends a stunning spell at the first man before the Death Eater can even reach for his wand. The red light fills the pub, and the man is lifted off his feet, crashing into the bar. The second Death Eater lunges, shouting a curse, but Harry drops to one knee, letting the binding curse sail over his head. He flickers his wand in a jagged arc, and a blast of kinetic energy sends the second man through a window and into the street. The third Death Eater is faster. He is a veteran of the war. With a brutal flick of his wrist, he sends a silent curse that catches Harry in the chest, knocking him backward. Harry's wand skitters across the floor, out of reach. The Death Eater stands over him, his wand tip glowing with a sickly white light. He sneers, savouring the moment he captured the ghost of Privet Drive. Suddenly, a shadow lurges from behind the bar. Lydia doesn't have magic, but she does have a bottle of heavy gin. She smashes it with a sickening thud against the back of the man's head. The Death Eater's eyes roll back, and he collapses into a heap. The room is silent again, save for the sound of broken glass. Harry scrambles to his feet, retrieves his wand, and quickly breaks the freezing charm on Sandra. There is no time for a reunion. He tells her to run, to go to a specific address where the squibs will find her. As Harry and Lydia sprint back toward the safety of the tunnels, the adrenaline begins to fade. Lydia looks at Harry, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as she attempts to process the violence she has just witnessed. She speaks of her shock, admitting she has never seen anyone move with such visceral, unpredictable lethality. She observes that his time in the underground hasn't just made him a wizard, it has forged him into a weapon the Death Eaters are completely unprepared to face. Harry doesn't thank her, but for the first time in a long time, he doesn't look away when she speaks. When Harry and Lydia return to the underground station, they are not met with praise. Dumbledore is waiting for them, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He tells them that their reckless mission risks the safety of every person in the tunnels. Lydia does not back down. She takes the full blame, standing tall even though she has no magic to defend herself. She tells Dumbledore that if they spend all their time hiding while the people who cared for them are tortured, then the Resistance has already lost its soul. She asks him what the point of a Chosen One is if he isn't allowed to save anyone. Without waiting for an answer, she storms out of the room, leaving a heavy silence behind. Harry stands in the heavy silence, the term Chosen One repeating in his head, like a question he doesn't know how to answer. He looks at Dumbledore with a quizzical gaze, seeking the truth behind a name and a destiny he never chose. Dumbledore meets his eyes, the harshness of his cold fury suddenly replaced by a sharp, familiar twinkle. He tells Harry that the path of the Chosen One is a story that is still being written and has yet to be fully decided. Dumbledore turns and abruptly storms out of the room, leaving Harry alone in the dim light of the bunker, with a new and terrifying weight on his shoulders. It is July 31st, and Harry is now 16 years old. He expects another quiet day of research, but Ron and Lydia have orchestrated a different kind of gift. They have convinced the dueling instructors that it is time to stop protecting Harry and to start testing him. Sirius Black stands with the instructors, a wide, mischievous smile on his face. He tells Harry that his contribution to the birthday surprise is the choice of opponent, a true baptism of fire. The entire student body of the underground resistance gathers in the Great Cavern, the air thick with excitement and nerves. Most of the crowd is betting against Harry, viewing him as an urban legend with plenty of potential but no real experience. Cedric Diggory stands on the opposite side of the platform, the golden boy of the resistance, looking calm and formidable. Harry turns to Sirius, his shock contained within the mention of Cedric's name. Sirius looks back with a grin, admitting that while the odds of a victory are tiny, a win for Harry would cost Lupin an entire case of butterbeer. He tells Harry to do him proud and show the room what a Potter is capable of. The duel begins, and the crowd is immediately shocked. Cedric does not play his usual game of waiting and defending. He goes on a brutal high-speed offensive. He fires spells with a speed that forces Harry to move with every ounce of his agility. He is treating him like an equal threat. Harry meets every blast with a counter-curse. He moves with a jagged, unpredictable grace, using the uneven floor of the cavern to his advantage. The duel becomes a blur of red, blue and gold light until Cedric decides to bring the fight to a definitive end. He draws deep into his power and casts his strongest spell, a great golden roar of pure, blinding white energy. It charges across the platform like a physical wall of magic, intended to crush Harry's defences and finish the match. Harry doesn't flinch, he does what feels natural to him. He lowers his wand and opens his palm, allowing the tide in his blood to become a silent vacuum that pulls the very light out of the air. The crowd watches in shock as Cedric's massive spell is literally inhaled by the darkness surrounding Harry, plunging the entire cavern into a split second of absolute terrifying silence. Inside Harry, the absorbed energy rages like a trapped storm, and he realizes with a jolt of fear that if he released the full weight of it, Cedric would be destroyed where he stands. He closes his eyes and desperately tries to bleed off only a tiny fraction of the power, intending a gentle strike just to end the match. But even that small shard of magic erupts from his wand with a devastating, unpolished force that hits Cedric like a physical blow from a giant. Cedric is thrown back across the cavern, his body skidding over the stone until he hits the far wall with a heavy, sickening thud. The reigning champion has been defeated, but the silence that follows is not one of celebration. It is one of awe and fear. Harry stands in the centre of the platform, his chest heaving and his hand trembling from the sheer volume of power he just channeled. He walks over to a dazed Cedric and offers him a hand, mirroring the gesture Cedric once gave to Ron. As the crowd begins to cheer, Harry looks up and sees Dumbledore watching from the shadows, looking like a man who has just seen a weapon finally sharpened to a dangerous, unpredictable point. The roar of the crowd in the dueling cavern fades as Harry follows Lydia deep into the forgotten veins of the London Underground. They move past the cots and the tactical maps, climbing a rusted service ladder that leads to a narrow ventilation ledge high above the Thames. From this hidden perch, they can see the dark, shimmering water of the river. Lydia reaches into the pocket of her heavy coat and pulls out a small cardboard box containing a humble cake with simple white frosting. She holds it out to him, her eyes reflecting the silver light of the river as she makes a quiet joke about the morning at the orphanage. She warns him to keep his magic in check this time, jokingly claiming she doesn't want to see anyone else floating away over the London skyline. Harry looks at her, the realization hitting him that she has remembered the truth of his power all along. Lydia gives a sad smile and admits that Dumbledore asked her to lie, wanting Harry to believe their reunion was a mere chance meeting. She reveals Dumbledore's plan was to test him, to see if the years spent outside the Order's gaze had twisted him into something dark. She tells Harry that she knew the truth the moment she saw him again, seeing only the boy she believed in. She goes on to say, watching Harry obtain his wand at Ollivander's was the most profound moment of her life, a confirmation for her that he is the one meant to save them. A heavy sadness comes over Harry as he asks about her own past, prompting Lydia to speak of her life before the orphanage. She describes growing up in a prominent wizarding family that waited desperately for her magic to manifest, only to be told on her 10th birthday that she was a squib. She recounts the sting of being abandoned by her own blood, and how Dumbledore found her, giving her a purpose just as he has for so many others in the tunnels. Lydia looks at Harry and confesses that from the first moment they met, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't known since her childhood. In the silence of the ledge, she tells him that in him, she finally felt as though she had found a family of her own. Harry looks at the cake, and then at Lydia. For the first time in his life, the memory of the orphanage doesn't bring a cold weight to his chest. The tide in his blood, which usually feels like a restless storm, becomes calm and steady. As they sit on the edge, the tension of the last year finally breaks. They laugh together, a sound that feels out of place in a world filled with sirens and whispered prophecies. Lydia leans in and kisses him. It is a soft, grounding moment that feels more powerful than any spell Harry has ever cast. With the cold wind of the Thames on his face, Harry feels a transformation. The boy who scavenged for bread and the soldier who defeated Cedric Diggory merge into something new. He no longer feels like a ghost or a pawn. As he looks out over the dark city, Harry feels a surge of invincible strength. He feels as though he could face Voldemort's entire army with nothing but his holy wand and the memory of this moment. Over the following weeks, Lydia and Dumbledore begin leaving on frequent secretive missions. Harry notices the increasing frequency of their departures, but Lydia refuses to share any details of their work. He can see that she wants to tell him everything, but Dumbledore has sworn her to a strict silence she is determined to keep. Before she leaves for her last assignment, she pauses and leaves a soft, grounding kiss on Harry's cheek. The following afternoon, Harry is deep in the training tunnels with Sirius and Lupin. He moves with a newfound precision, blocking and countering spells with the jagged street-learned reflexes he has been sharpening for months. Harry executes a sharp block and follows it with a counterspell that catches Lupin squarely in the chest. Sirius watches with a wide grin, the excitement causing him to accidentally call Harry by his father's name, James. Lupin turns with a patient, knowing look, reminding Sirius that he is confusing the past with the present once again. Sirius offers a quick, sheepish apology before stepping forward to take his turn in the duel. As Sirius fires a flash of red light from his wand, a sudden violent pressure explodes behind Harry's eyes. His defense fails, and the spell hits him squarely in the chest, knocking the air from his lungs as he collapses to the stone. The training room vanishes instantly, replaced by the dark, black marble of the Ministry of Magic. He sees Lydia frozen on her knees in the center of a darkened hall, her face twisted in a look of absolute terror. Voldemort stands over her, his presence a chilling shadow that seems to consume the light in the room. The Dark Lord subjects her to the Cruciatus Curse, demanding to know the location of Harry Potter, as Lydia's screams echo in Harry's mind. Just as the pain becomes unbearable, Harry is jolted back into his own body, gasping for breath on the floor of the bunker. He frantically describes the vision to Sirius and Lupin, the Ministry, the torture, and the face of the Dark Lord. He ignores their attempts to calm him, refusing their pleas to wait for Dumbledore to return from their joint mission. Harry reminds them that Lydia left with the headmaster, and if she has been captured, it means Dumbledore may already be dead. He tells them he is leaving for the Ministry immediately, and he will go alone if he has to. Sirius and Lupin exchange a grim, silent look, their instincts as protectors finally overriding the Order's strict commands. They agree to go with him, moving through the hidden arteries of the city with a synchronized professional speed. They arrive at the Ministry of Magic, stepping into the massive atrium with their wands drawn and ready for a fight. The arrival at the Ministry is heavy with a suffocating silence that feels like a physical weight against Harry's chest. Before the shadows shift, Sirius looks at Lupin and notes how much the moment feels like the old days, remarking that it feels right to have a Potter standing in the mix once again. This brief moment of connection is shattered as Voldemort emerges from the darkness, flanked by 4 Death Eaters whose silver masks and flowing black robes seem to swallow the remaining light in the hall. Sirius and Lupin instantly move to shield Harry, but with a wordless and effortless flick of his wand, Voldemort catches all 3 of them in a single binding spell. Harry finds himself frozen in place, and though he desperately tries to force his wand hand to move, his muscles remain locked by a power he cannot overcome. The Dark Lord moves closer, observing that Harry's mind is an open book, and mocking his lack of mental defences, telling him he was far too easy to manipulate, before demanding to know where Dumbledore has taken the Horcruxes that were stolen from him. Harry can only stare back in genuine confusion, as the word Horcrux means nothing to him. When Voldemort realises Harry is telling the truth, he turns his wand on Sirius, subjecting him to a brutal torture, while mocking the fact that Dumbledore has kept his chosen one completely in the dark. Harry pleads for the Dark Lord to stop, but Voldemort simply gives him an ultimatum: reveal the location of the Resistance, or watch his godfather die where he stands. Harry panics, his mind racing through every trick he knows, but he stops when he sees Sirius give a tiny, firm shake of his head, silently demanding that Harry remain silent, regardless of the cost. The tension is suddenly broken by a high-pitched scream from the Dark Lord himself, who falls to one knee as if part of his very soul has been struck by an invisible, distant blow. The binding spells snap, releasing Harry and Lupin. Sirius is caught in another binding spell by one of the Death Eaters. Harry doesn't hesitate to aim his holy wand to the recovering monster. Voldemort slashes his wand in a desperate counter, and their spells meet in mid-air, creating a shimmering golden bubble that locks them in a struggle of pure will. While the wands are locked, Lupin engages the Death Eaters to provide cover, finally striking the wizard who holds the curse on Sirius, and releasing him from his restraints. Sirius shouts for Lupin to take Harry and run, lunging forward to physically tackle the Dark Lord and break the connection between the wands. Lupin grabs Harry by the shoulder and shoves him towards the emerald flames of the Floo network, forcing him away from the battle. The last image Harry sees through the spinning light is a final flash of green hitting Sirius's chest, and the peaceful smile on his godfather's face as the light leaves his eyes. Harry and Lupin stumble out of the emerald flames and back into the cold concrete reality of the bunker, their clothes scorched and their spirits broken. Lydia and Dumbledore have come rushing toward them through the dim light of the station, but the words die in their throats when they see Harry's hollow, bloodshot eyes. The silence in the tunnel is absolute, as Lupin quietly informs the ex-headmaster that Sirius is gone, fallen in a battle that was never supposed to happen. Lydia reaches out to embrace Harry, but he flinches away as if her touch is fire, his face twisted in a mask of stinging silent shame. He tells them all that the fault lies with him, admitting his own arrogance in believing he was already powerful enough to face the Dark Lord on his own terms. The guilt becomes a physical weight, and Harry slams his fist against the reinforced wall, the impact cracking the concrete as a shockwave of raw magic ripples through the station. As Harry turns and storms off into the darkness of the corridor, Dumbledore's hand slowly relaxes from the hilt of his wand, his eyes tracking the boy with a look of profound clinical caution. Sitting alone in the suffocating silence of his room, Harry's mind begins to burn with the secrets Dumbledore has kept hidden, specifically the word Voldemort used, Horcrux. He realizes that for all the training and all the talks of destiny, Dumbledore has kept his chosen one on a leash, made of half-truths and shadows. The tide in his blood begins to rise again, no longer a feverish heat, but a cold, crushing pressure that causes the glass on his desk to shatter into dust. He questions how he is expected to save a world that views him only as a weapon to be pointed, but never as a man to be trusted. In the peak of his isolation, a single chilling thought takes hold of his mind, darker than any shadow Voldemort has ever cast. He stares into the void of the bunker and wonders if a world built on the blood of his family and the lies of his mentors is even worth saving at all. Weeks after the fall of Sirius, Harry stands in the skeletal remains of an industrial site on the Thames, his mind finally piecing together the grim truths Dumbledore had kept in the shadows. He reflects on the headmaster's explanation of how Voldemort truly returned, merging a soul fragment from the forest of Albania with the piece hidden in a diary, a dark union that claimed Ginny Weasley's life. The long secretive missions Lydia and Dumbledore had been conducting finally make sense. They were never just scouting the city, they were hunting and destroying the Dark Lord's Horcruxes. The tide in Harry's blood has settled into a cold, predatory stillness that leaves him unrecognisable to the Order back in the bunker. They are no longer hiding, they are looking for the next piece of a broken soul. A sharp crack of apparition echoes through the rusted iron beams, and Harry watches as Bellatrix Lestrange emerges from the shadows near the river's edge. He feels no surge of fear, only a clinical intent as he gestures for Lupin to move in, signalling that their mark has finally arrived. Lupin grips Harry's shoulder, his voice a low, urgent whisper, warning him that Bellatrix is as lethally skilled as she is unhinged. Harry doesn't wait for the end of the sentence. He shakes off the hand and lunges from the cover of the rusted beams, a bolt of red light erupting from his holly wand. Bellatrix twists with a predator's grace, swatting the spell aside with a flick of her wrist before firing a silent curse that catches Lupin in the chest, sending him spinning away into the darkness. She turns her manic gaze on Harry, her wand tip glowing with a sickly white heat, as she unleashes a barrage of curses intended to break the ghost of Privet Drive. Instead of shielding, Harry opens his palm and allows the tide in his blood to pull the spells into himself, feeling the stolen magic swell until his skin feels tight with the pressure. He releases a concentrated pulse of that energy, a violet shockwave that slams Bellatrix backward into the brickwork with enough force to crack the wall. Lupin scrambles to his feet and disarms the dazed witch before she can recover, but she simply sits against the wall with a bloody, mad smile on her face. When Harry demands to know where the Dark Lord keeps his most prized possessions, she asks with a mock sweetness how her cousin is doing, before feigning a gasp of realization and laughing that Sirius is already dead. Harry doesn't shout, he simply points his wand at her heart and whispers the Cruciatus curse, watching as the woman who mocked his godfather's death finally learns the meaning of pain. The air in the warehouse screams with a raw electrical crackle of the curse until Lupin lunges forward, grabbing Harry's arm to break the connection. He tells Harry that this isn't the path of a hero, and that Sirius would never have approved of such a soul-crushing display of darkness. Harry's head snaps around, his eyes glowing with a cold, terrifying intensity, as he shoves Lupin back with a burst of wordless magic. He tells the man he doesn't need a morality check from a werewolf, and that the old ways of the Order are exactly what got Sirius killed. Lupin stares at Harry for a long moment, his face a mask of profound disappointment and sorrow, before he turns and disappears into the shadows of the Thames. Left alone with his prey, Harry turns back to Bellatrix, the tide in his blood finally overflowing into his hand. The torture continues in the absolute silence of the docks, until Bellatrix's mind finally fractures under the weight of the pain. Through her gasping sobs, she reveals that the Dark Lord's most prized possession, a golden cup, is hidden deep within the high-security vaults of Gringotts Bank. Harry returns to the reinforced walls of the bunker, dragging a broken, muttering Bellatrix Lestrange through the dim corridors before throwing her into a cold, iron-barred cell. The silence of the underground is heavy with the weight of his actions, and the tide in his blood still thrums with a restless, dark energy. Albus Dumbledore finds him there, watching the boy with a look that is no longer clinical, but deeply weary. The old man finally breaks the silence, admitting that he has kept his distance because of the darkness he sensed growing within Harry. A power so volatile that Dumbledore himself had not yet decided if Harry was destined to save the world or be the one to finally destroy it. Dumbledore steps closer, his voice softening as he addresses the ghosts of Harry's childhood. He confesses that the decision to leave him at St. Jude's was born of a desperate need to keep him hidden from the countless enemies who would have hunted him had he stayed by Dumbledore's side. He admits he failed the boy, offering a quiet apology for the years of isolation and hunger that forged Harry into the weapon he has become. Dumbledore reaches into his robes and pulls out a shimmering silvery fabric, telling Harry that it rightly belongs to him, as it was once the property of his father. As Harry's fingers brush the fabric, he feels the violent tide in his blood, the restless storm of magic that has fueled his rage for weeks, suddenly begin to recede. He looks at the invisibility cloak, and for the first time he feels a visceral connection to the parents he never knew, a sense of belonging that cuts through the fog of his resentment. The clarity is immediate. The clinical wall between him and the headmaster crumbles, replaced by a fragile but real sense of shared purpose. Harry looks at the old man, his mind steady and his focus sharp, and simply says, "Thank you." Harry, Lydia and Dumbledore gather around a tactical map in the flickering light of the bunker's nerve centre, joined by a girl with a sharp, observant eyes, whom Lydia introduces as Hermione Granger. Lydia explains that Hermione is the leading expert on the Dark Lord's history, the mind responsible for tracking his previous soul shards to a cursed ring, a locket, and a lost diadem. Hermione notes she had long suspected Voldemort was using the heirlooms of the Hogwarts founders to anchor his soul. But until Harry broke Bellatrix, the location of Hufflepuff's cup had remained a frustrating mystery. The atmosphere in the room grows heavy as the reality of their target sets in. Lydia admits that while they finally know where the cup is hidden, she has no idea how they can possibly breach the high-security vaults of Gringotts without alerting the entire ministry. She looks to the others, her face etched with the silent admission that the bank is a fortress the Resistance has never dared to touch. The silence is broken by Hermione, who leans over a set of stolen blueprints and calmly states that she has already devised a plan to get them through the front doors. Hermione details the strategy, explaining that they will use a single dose of Polyjuice potion brewed from a lock of hair taken from the broken woman in the cell below. With Bellatrix's wand and Harry hidden beneath the silvery folds of his father's cloak, they have a way past the goblins. Dumbledore observes that since they only have the one prisoner to mimic, only one of them can serve as the decoy. Harry immediately turns to Lydia, his voice sharp and protective, telling her she isn't doing this, he won't risk her in the heart of the enemy's bank. As the realization of who is left sinks in, all eyes slowly turn toward the headmaster. Dumbledore draws himself up to his full, imposing height, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and wounded pride, as he dismisses the suggestion as utterly ridiculous and far beneath the dignity of a wizard of his standing. Lydia doesn't flinch. She looks the greatest wizard of the age in the eye and tells him to either find a better plan or start drinking the potion. The scene shifts abruptly to the dim light of the bunker's staging area. Standing in Dumbledore's embroidered, floor-length robes is Bellatrix Lestrange. Her, or rather his, expression is one of profound, wide-eyed horror. Flicking his wand with a sharp, reluctant motion, his embroidered robes shiver and darken, lengthening and narrowing until they become the tattered, elegant black dress of the Dark Lord's lieutenant. The headmaster looks down at his new form with a scowl, making it understood that if any record of this humiliation ever reaches the history books, he will personally ensure the Hogwarts library is burned to the ground. Harry watches, barely able to hide his shock, as Dumbledore, still moving with his usual dignified grace, adjusts his skirts and prepares for the heist. Harry and the disguised Dumbledore arrive at the white stone walls of Gringotts, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient magic. Harry is a silent shadow, invisible beneath the silvery folds of the cloak his father once wore. They move through the bank with a chilling synchronized efficiency, descending into the deep light-drinking caverns buried beneath the city streets. Inside the vaults, they retrieve the golden cup, but the victory is short-lived as the trap is sprung in the tunnels outside. A group of Death Eaters blocks their exit, their mask reflecting the dim torchlight. Dumbledore drops his disguise in a swirl of dark fabric and holds the hallway with a series of blinding explosive spells that shake the very foundations of the bank. Amidst the chaos, Harry feels a sharp, agonizing coldness erupt in his scar, alerting Dumbledore that the Dark Lord is close. He can feel Voldemort's fury vibrating through the stone, a rhythmic, terrifying pressure that signals their escape has been cut off. Realizing they are trapped between an army and the abyss, Dumbledore uses a massive final burst of magic to slam and seal the vault door, locking them both inside a chamber of gold and shifting shadows. In the sudden ringing silence of the tomb, Dumbledore looks at Harry with an expression of calm, terrifying certainty. He tells Harry he has finally made his decision. Harry is confused, his mind racing to find the meaning behind a choice he doesn't understand. Suddenly, Dumbledore whips his wand with a sharp, violent motion, sending a spell toward Harry that forces the boy to fire a countercurse in a desperate split-second reflex. Their spells meet in the center of the vault, a clash of red and white lights that illuminates the piles of gold in a rhythmic, blinding pulse. Harry feels the tide in his blood rise to a level he has never known, a restless heat that threatens to swallow the room. He wonders if the headmaster has been compromised by an Imperio curse, but as the power vibrates through his arm, a surge of arrogance takes hold, a chance to finally best the strongest wizard of their age. The familiar tide wells up inside him, craving to consume Dumbledore's magic and turn it back on the old man. But Harry has a sudden grounding thought. He wants to win this with his own craft, to prove he is more than just a weapon. He pushes with everything he has, and for a fleeting moment, he feels as though he is actually winning. Then Dumbledore's magic becomes overwhelming, a raw and ancient power that pushes Harry back with the weight of centuries. The tide inside Harry begins to rage, whispering that he will lose if he does not let it take control. Just as Harry reaches the point of collapse, Dumbledore looks at him and offers a small, knowing wink. The headmaster suddenly lets go, his defense vanishing as if it were never there. Harry's spell hits him with the force of a tidal wave, and Dumbledore's wand, a long, gnarled piece of wood, is torn from his hand. It flies through the air, landing perfectly in Harry's grip as the silence of the vault returns. Harry stands in the ringing silence of the vault, his fingers curled around the ancient gnarled wood of Dumbledore's wand. He stares at the headmaster, his mind reeling from the sudden violence and the even more sudden surrender. Dumbledore offers no complex explanation, simply stating that it was a test. Harry gestures to the chaos erupting outside the sealed door, noting that this is a hell of a time for a performance, and moves to return the wand. Dumbledore refuses the gesture, his hand remaining firm as he tells Harry to keep the wand and the cup. He instructs the boy to pull the silvery folds of the invisibility cloak over himself and escape through the confusion while he provides a distraction. When Harry refuses to leave him behind, Dumbledore offers a calm assurance that he will follow as soon as the way is clear. The headmaster reaches into his robes and pulls out the curved blackened wand that belonged to Bellatrix Lestrange. He grips the cruel instrument with a grim determination, the weapon of torture looking utterly alien in the hands of a man who spent a lifetime seeking the light. Dumbledore pauses, his voice dropping to a whisper as he tells Harry that whatever happens, help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. Harry looks at him with a flash of genuine confusion. The school, he thinks. What's that got to do with anything? But before he can question the ex-headmaster's words, Dumbledore turns toward the heavy iron door. With a sharp, decisive motion, Dumbledore throws open the vault, stepping out into a blaze of glory and the waiting army. Harry, hidden beneath the cloak, has no choice but to move. The weight of the cup and the gnarled wand, the only solid things in a world that is suddenly falling apart. Dumbledore becomes a whirlwind of silver and gold light, the blackened wand of Bellatrix Lestrange moving with a terrifying, jagged speed that seems to mock its own cruel history. He holds back dozens of curses at a time, his movements a blur as he deflects spells into the stone floor and sends roaring waves of fire back at the encroaching Death Eaters. Harry watches from beneath the cloak in absolute awe, the realization hitting him that Dumbledore is an extraordinary wizard, truly the greatest of their age. Amidst the chaos, Harry feels a sinking weight in his chest, a certainty that no matter how hard he trains, he will never be a legend like Albus Dumbledore. But Dumbledore is only one man, and the blackened wand he carries is an unwilling tool in his hand. As he turns to shield himself from a volley of curses, Voldemort seizes the momentary opening with a predator's precision. The Dark Lord's wand slashes through the air, and a bolt of brilliant, sickening, vibrant green light streaks across the hall. It hits Dumbledore squarely in the chest. The roar of the battle seems to vanish, replaced by a suffocating absolute silence. Harry watches as the man who was his protector and his only link to a world of rules falls backward, his body hitting the marble floor with a dull, final thud. The very light in the room seems to dim, as if the world itself is mourning the stillness in Dumbledore's eyes. Harry stumbles through the dark, damp service tunnels of the underground, drenched from the London rain and gasping for air. He feels like a ghost haunting his own life, clutching the cold gold of Hufflepuff's cup in one hand and the ancient gnarled weight of Dumbledore's wand in the other. The wand feels like lead, a heavy constant reminder of the price paid to retrieve it. Lydia stands in the centre of the main junction, her silhouette sharp against the flickering emergency lights of the station. When she hears Harry's footsteps, she doesn't call out, she simply waits, her hands trembling as she searches the shadows behind him for the tall, silver-bearded man who was supposed to be leading the way. When she sees only Harry, her gaze falls to the objects in his hands, and the silence that follows becomes suffocating. Lydia doesn't need to ask. The weight of the wand and the cup tells the story of the sacrifice, and her expression shifts from terror to a deep, hollow grief. Harry is consumed by a crushing wave of shame, feeling like a coward for slipping out the back door while the greatest wizard of all time stood alone against an army. He thinks of Dumbledore's final command to save the cup and himself, but his voice is nothing more than a broken whisper, as he confesses to Lydia that he simply ran. Lydia doesn't judge him, she simply pulls him into her embrace. Harry buries his face against her shoulder and cries, the sound echoing off the cold tiles of the station, realizing that the hand that had pulled the strings of his life for 16 years was finally gone, and he was no longer a pawn on a board of half-truths, but the player left to make the final move. Harry pulls back from the comfort of Lydia's embrace, his eyes fixed on the golden cup resting on the cold, damp floor of the junction. He raises the gnarled ancient wand Dumbledore gave him and tries to force the tide in his blood into the wood, desperate to feel the roar of magic the headmaster had commanded. But the wand remains a dead weight. It feels like a piece of lead, cold and unresponsive to his touch. The silence of the wood is deafening, a physical manifestation of his own guilt. It is as if the wand knows he is a thief who fled while its true master fell. With a snarl of frustration, Harry thrusts the Elder Wand into his belt and draws his own Holy Wand. The moment his fingers wrap around the familiar grip, the connection is instantaneous and violent. The tide doesn't just hum, it surges with a predatory heat, fueled by his grief and the raw, jagged edges of his rage. He whispers the incantation for fiend fire, but instead of the usual uncontrollable inferno that consumes everything in its path, The magic manifests as a singular white-hot ribbon of living flame. It isn't a wild beast, it's a surgical blade. With a flick of his wrist, Harry commands the fire to coil around the golden cup. The heat is so intense it turns the air to a shimmering haze, yet the flames never stray an inch toward the surrounding tunnel walls. As the last of the white-hot flames flicker out, the silence in the tunnel is shattered by a jagged spike of cold pain that erupts behind Harry's scar. He is dragged violently into the Dark Lord's fracturing mind, leaving the damp London underground behind. He finds himself in a chamber of cold stone where Voldemort stands, his red eyes wide with a rare trembling fear as he realizes another of his anchors has been dismantled. The Dark Lord is no longer a figure of cold command, but a man paralyzed by the knowledge of his own vulnerability. He stands over the massive undulating coils of Nagini, who is now encased in a shimmering golden cage of protective enchantments. Harry jolts back into his own body, his boots slipping on the wet tiles as he gasps for air. Lydia is there instantly, her hand steadying his shoulders, but he pulls away with a newfound lethal clarity. He meets her gaze and silently conveys the urgency of the moment, indicating with a sharp, decisive gesture that the time for mourning has passed. He makes it clear that the council must be summoned, Hermione, the Order, and everyone left who can carry a wand. The atmosphere in the war room is thick with the heavy, unspoken grief for Albus Dumbledore. Flickering emergency lights cast long, jagged shadows across the tactical maps as the remaining leaders of the Resistance gather in the cramped space. Mad-Eye Moody stands in the corner, his magical eye whirling with restless paranoia, while McGonagall and Lupin stand side by side, their faces etched with the exhaustion of a decade of losing ground. Harry stands at the head of the table, the knurled Elder Wand a cold, silent weight in his belt. Breaking the heavy silence, Harry speaks with a newfound clarity, telling the assembled council that the snake is the final anchor, the last piece of the Dark Lord's soul that remains, stating they must find a way to draw the monster out from behind his defences and force him into the open for the final strike. As the weight of the task settles over the room, Hermione steps forward into the light, her fingers tracing the ancient jagged silhouette of Hogwarts on the map. She presents her findings with a clinical intensity, drawing from years of studying the Dark Lord's obsession with his own history. She indicates that Voldemort is a man rooted in twisted sentimentality for his past. The castle isn't just a fortress to him, but the only place he ever truly considered home. By launching a full-scale assault on the heart of his pride, they won't just be attacking a building, they will be forcing the monster to defend his sanctuary. Hermione's logic is cold and undeniable. If they strike Hogwarts with everything the Resistance has left, Voldemort will have no choice but to descend with his entire army, bringing the snake within reach for the final kill. The bunker is a hive of controlled chaos as the strike team prepares for the journey to Hogsmeade. Harry, Lydia, Ron and Hermione check their gear in the flickering light, the air thick with the metallic scent of sharpened blades and charged wands. They are the vanguard, sent ahead to coordinate with McGonagall's contact in the village, while the rest of the Resistance mobilises for the march on Hogwarts. Before Harry can reach the exit, Lupin intercepts him, his hand catching Harry's shoulder with a firm, grounding pressure. He pulls Harry into the shadows of a rusted support beam, his expression a mixture of profound sorrow and quiet, resilient strength. Lupin imparts a final warning, urging Harry not to let the battle, or the tide in his blood, wash away the boy he was before the bunker, the boy his parents would have known. He reaches into his worn jacket and produces a small, weathered photograph he found among Sirius's personal effects. Harry takes the photo, his fingers trembling slightly as he looks at the moving images of James and Lily Potter. They are laughing, waving at the camera with a joy that seems impossible in the world Harry now inhabits. Lupin conveys the depth of his pride, assuring Harry that his parents and Sirius would be staggered by the man he has become. He makes it clear that despite the shadows and the hard choices, he is proud to have stood beside Harry. The silence between them is heavy with the memory of their earlier confrontation. Harry offers a wordless, profound apology for his cruel words in the Thames warehouse, making it clear that he truly never saw Lupin anything less than a mentor and a friend, regardless of his condition. Lupin offers a weary, knowing smile, indicating that he had already forgiven him for his desperation. They share a brief, powerful embrace, a final bridge over the rift between them. before Harry turns away, with the photo tucked safely against his heart. Harry steps into the emerald heat of the Floo network. One by one, the team vanishes into the spinning green flames, leaving the London Underground behind for the cold, snow-dusted streets of Hogsmeade. The green flames of the Floo network spit Harry out into the drafty, salt-stained interior of the Hog's Head Inn. The air here is thick with the smell of sour ale and goat, a sharp contrast to the damp metallic tang of the London Underground. Aberforth Dumbledore stands behind the bar, his eyes strikingly similar to his brother's, but lacking the twinkle, fixed on the small group. With a curt, jagged motion of his head, he indicates a door at the back of the room, signalling that a guest is already waiting. Harry leaves Lydia, Ron and Hermione with Aberforth, and enters the back room alone. Standing in the centre of the dimly lit space is a man with greasy, shoulder-length black hair, and skin the colour of parched bone. Severus Snape doesn't move as Harry enters. He simply watches with a cold, predatory stillness. The sneer that curls his lip is instantaneous, a reflex born of decades of bitterness, as he notes that Harry is the walking image of his father. But then the mask slips for a fraction of a second. His voice drops into a haunting, guttural softness as he acknowledges that Harry has his mother's eyes. Snape reveals his position as the current headmaster of Hogwarts, a title that feels like a heavy, ill-fitting shroud. He makes it clear that he has the power to bypass the castle's heightened defences and get Harry inside. But he pauses, his dark eyes boring into Harry's with a mixture of suspicion and a deep-buried grief. He admits that Albus Dumbledore died, unsure if Harry could truly be trusted to finish what was started. And now, with the old man gone, the question remains unanswered. Snape challenges Harry's notorious arrogance, noting that it is still a matter of debate whether Harry is the world's saviour or its eventual destroyer. Harry stands his ground, the weight of the Elder Wand in his belt and the memory of Dumbledore's final fall vivid in his mind. He thinks back to the vault, searching for the one truth the headmaster left with him. A sudden piercing clarity hits him. He meets Snape's gaze and repeats the final riddle Dumbledore whispered before the iron doors opened. That help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. The silence that follows is absolute. Snape stares at Harry for a long, agonising moment, the words acting as a key to a lock Harry hadn't realised was there. The tension in Snape's shoulders doesn't vanish, but it shifts, yielding to the reality of their shared burden. He simply asks what Harry needs to begin. The castle of Hogwarts stands as a jagged crown against the Scottish Highlands, no longer a school, but a fortress of the last resort. With Snape's assistance, the ancient defences have been woven into a lethal web, and the resistance waits in a heavy, suffocating silence. A terrified hum vibrates through the stone floors, the collective heartbeat of hundreds of fighters holding their breath in the dark. Lydia moves with a quiet, practiced efficiency, guiding the squibs and the youngest refugees into the safety of the room of requirement. She secures the entrance with a lingering look toward the Great Hall, her face a mask of grim resolve as she locks away the people her and Dumbledore have fought so hard to protect. Near the heavy oak doors of the entrance, Harry finds Ron. Their eyes meet across the sea of raised wands, and they share a singular sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement of the long road from the London tunnels to this final stand. The silence is shattered by a voice that isn't heard so much as felt, a cold and high-pitched vibration that seems to emanate from the very air itself. Voldemort's ultimatum rolls over the battlements like a physical weight, promising that every life within the walls will be spared if Harry Potter is delivered to him by midnight. The Dark Lord speaks of mercy as if it were a currency, his tone dripping with a mocking, serpentine grace. The castle does not answer, not a single footstep falters, not a single voice calls out. The defiance is found in the absolute ringing stillness of the stone. When the deadline passes, the world outside the windows disappears into a chaotic bloom of light. The assault begins not with a shout, but with the sky falling. A barrage of dark curses rain down upon the castle's shimmering blue protective dome, the impact sending tremors deep into the foundations. The war has finally come to the front door, and as the first cracks appear in the magical shield, the Street Mage feels the tide in his blood rise to meet the coming storm. The shimmering blue dome over Hogwarts doesn't simply fade, it shatters like a million shards of falling glass. The first wave of the assault is a physical weight, a concussive blast that blows the heavy oak doors of the Great Hall off their hinges. For a heartbeat there is a vacuum of sound, and then the screaming begins, not from the defenders, but from the spells themselves as they tear through the ancient air. The courtyard becomes a killing floor in seconds. The Death Eaters flood through the breach, their silver masks reflecting the jagged flashes of green and red light. They aren't alone. Giants loom in the periphery, their massive clubs swinging with a slow, tectonic force that brings battlements crashing down in the stone below. High above the carnage, McGonagall stands on a stone balcony, her face a mask of ancient, focused fury. With a sharp, rhythmic motion of her wand, she brings the very bones of the castle to life. The stone knights and the heavy statues leap from their plinths, their granite limbs grinding with a tectonic roar as they charge into the fray. They move with a heavy, unstoppable grace, their swords clashing against the dark magic of the invaders with a hollow ring that echoes through the courtyard, providing a wall of living rocks against the silver-masked tide. From the high ramparts, Mad-Eye Moody orchestrates a symphony of defensive fire. His magical eye spins in a frantic blue blur, tracking every shadow and movement through the thick, acrid smoke. His wand spits a constant stream of jagged blue light, picking off targets with a hunter's speed. Besides him, the seasoned members of the Order follow his lead, their spells forming a secondary layer of protection that prevents the first wave of Death Eaters from completely overwhelming the inner gates. Despite the Resistance's desperate bravery, the sheer weight of Voldemort's army begins to crush the courtyard. The Giants, emboldened by the Ministry's dark reinforcements, swing their massive clubs through stone and bone alike, while silver-masked Death Eaters flood the breaches in an endless suffocating tide. Harry deflects a curse with a jagged flick of his wand, his eyes catching a flash of movement on the high battlements. Mad-Eye Moody falls, his body a broken silhouette against the fire-red sky as he crashes into the rubble of the courtyard below. The air is thick with the metallic tang of blood and the guttural snarls of werewolf packs. Harry turns, his heart freezing as he sees a young student being mauled in the shadows of a collapsed archway. The tide in his blood doesn't just rise, it boils. A predatory heat that demands an end to the restraint he has practiced for so long. As he stumbles across the uneven stone, his boot catches on a familiar, worn jacket. He looks down and sees Lupin lying among the debris, his eyes vacant and his hand still reaching for a wand that has finally gone silent. In that moment, the Street Mage vanishes, replaced by something ancient and catastrophic. Harry stops running. He walks into the very centre of the killing floor, his holly wand held low as he lets the tide wash over his consciousness. He stops deflecting spells. He begins to breathe them in. The air around him ripples as he draws the kinetic energy of every curse fired his way into the hollow of his chest, the dark pressure building until his vision swims with a violent violet light. The power becomes a deafening roar in his mind, drowning out the screams and the explosions until he can no longer distinguish friend from foe. His instinct screams for release. He pivots, his wand levelled at a pair of figures through the smoke, a raw magic already sparking at the tip of his wand, only for a frantic familiar shout to pierce the haze. He catches a glimpse of Ron and Hermione huddled behind a fallen pillar, and with a Herculean effort that feels like tearing his own muscles, he siphons the spell away. He pivots with a guttural roar, unleashing the built-up agony toward a massive flanks of Death Eaters and Giants. The force is cataclysmic, a shockwave of pure, unfiltered magic that doesn't just throw the attackers back, but levels the remaining statues and clears the courtyard in a single concussive pulse. As the dust begins to settle and the ringing in the air fades to a low hum, a cold, heavy silence descends. The Death Eaters parts like a dark curtain, and Voldemort steps into the clearing. He moves with a slow, serpentine grace, his red eyes fixed on Harry with a look of clinical fascination. Behind him, the massive shimmering coils of Nagini slide over the scorched marble, the final anchor and the final target within Harry's reach. Without a word, Voldemort slashes his wand through the air. A bolt of brilliant, sickening green light, the killing curse, streaks towards Harry. Harry has no time to dodge. He opens himself up and absorbs the curse. The sensation is unlike anything he has ever felt. It isn't just power, it is an absolute godlike clarity. The tide in his blood expands until it feels as though his veins are carrying the weight of a collapsing star. He realizes with a cold and terrifying certainty that he could end everything in a single heartbeat. He looks out at the battlefield and no longer sees allies or enemies. He sees insects, small and fragile, waiting to be crushed. His eyes lock onto Nagini. The shimmering golden cage surrounding her looks like thin glass. "Look how easy it is," the tide whispers in his mind. A seductive, oily voice that promises the end of all fear. Harry releases the tiniest molecule of the stored power, a mere flick of thought, and the snake simply evaporates into a fine black mist. The final Horcrux is erased from existence with the effort of a casual breath. But the darkness in his blood isn't satisfied. It surges higher, showing him a vision of a world scrubbed clean by his own hand. He could turn his wand on the Death Eaters and turn them to ash. He could turn it on the survivors, on Ron, on Hermione, on the Order, and erase the possibility of ever being betrayed or controlled again. He and Lydia could stand atop the ruins of Hogwarts, untouched and eternal, building a world where no one would ever have to die in a damp tunnel or fall from a battlement again. The Street Mage would finally be the master of the world that had tried to bury him. Just as the darkness prepares to pull the trigger on his humanity, a memory of a calm, terrifyingly certain face flickers in his mind. He feels the weight of the gnarled wand in his belt and remembers the silence of the vault. Dumbledore's presence echoes through the roar of the tide, a reminder that the old man had looked at Harry's violent potential and made his choice to trust the boy behind the power. Dumbledore had made his decision, and now it was time for Harry to make his. Harry reaches inward, but the tide is no longer a tool. It is a monster that has taken root in his soul. It fights back with a predatory scream, flooding his senses and threatening to drown his consciousness entirely. Harry searches deep within the architecture of his own magic, tracing the fever back to its heart. He finds the source, an endless roaring waterfall of dark energy that has fueled him since the day his parents died. With a mental roar of defiance, Harry turns every ounce of the Killing Curse's energy back onto that source. He strikes the tide at its root, intending to shatter the very thing that makes him special. The internal explosion is cataclysmic. Harry is flung back into his own physical body, his mind a void of white noise as he crashes onto the scorched marble. Across the clearing, Voldemort falls to one knee, touching his chest with a skeletal hand. A soundless scream escapes his lipless mouth as the fragment of his soul that lived inside Harry is violently torn away and destroyed. Harry gasps for air, his lungs burning, but it is the silence in his veins that truly terrifies him. The roaring waterfall of the tide has been reduced to a dry, silent riverbed. He feels small, brittle, and utterly human. Voldemort recovers first, staggering to his feet with a face etched in primal shaking rage. He sees Harry vulnerable and lashes out with a jagged binding curse. Harry reaches out to catch the light, prepared to breathe the magic into his blood as he has done 1,000 times before, but the power is gone. The spell slams into his chest, locking his limbs instantly. He is frozen into a rigid statue, his holy wand pinned uselessly against his thigh. Voldemort stalks across the scorched marble, a cold cackle escaping his throat as he pries the wand from Harry's paralysed fingers and snaps the wood in two. He tosses the splintered remains into the dirt, leaving Harry with nothing. Harry looks down at the broken wood, his mind racing through the fragments of his life. The orphan, the boy wonder, and the chosen one who just lost the only power he ever knew. But in the hollow silence of his mind, he pulls himself back to the cold, dark quiet of the abandoned tube station. He remembers the flickering candlelight and the moment he first dug deep into his chest to find a spark of energy. He remembers the copper coin vanishing from his left hand and appearing in his right. For years he believed that the tide was the source of everything, but in this moment of absolute stillness, the truth hits him. The tide was just a current he rode. The act of moving the coin, the prestige, that was him. That was his own magic, independent of the darkness he just destroyed. He doesn't try to move his frozen arms. He doesn't reach for the wand. Instead, he focuses on the gnarled ancient weight of the Elder Wand tucked into his belt, with the same singular intent he used for that first copper coin. He doesn't use the tide. He uses the boy wonder's own spark. In a blink, the Elder Wand simply vanishes from his belt and appears in his locked hand. The ancient wood hums with a violent, instantaneous recognition. It sings in his grip, acknowledging the master who finally found his own light. The binding curse shatters like glass. Harry moves with a blur of motion, swinging the wand upward just as Voldemort fires a final killing blast. The two spells collide in a blinding pillar of gold and white light. Harry doesn't look for a tide to carry him, he pours his own ironclad will into the wand, forcing his magic forward with a restless, crushing weight. He overpowers the Dark Lord by sheer force of spirit, his light drowning out Voldemort's malice. The light consumes the Dark Lord entirely. He doesn't fall, he simply begins to fray at the edges, his body turning to fine grey ash that is swept away by the wind. In seconds, the centre of the courtyard is empty, leaving nothing behind but the ringing silence and Harry, standing alone among the ruins. The war does not end with a triumphant roar, but with a long collective exhale that seems to ripple through the very stones of the castle. In the pale grey light of the morning after, the survivors begin the slow work of reclaiming the ruins. Harry stands high upon the shattered battlements of the astronomy tower, looking out over the horizon that is no longer choked by the smoke of dark magic. Below in the courtyard, Harry watches as Ron and Hermione stand together amidst the debris, finally allowing themselves a moment of shared quiet as they embrace during the first true sunrise of a world without Voldemort. Moving his gaze further along the scorched stones of the entrance, he sees Severus Snape and Minerva McGonagall standing in the shadow of the Great Hall. Snape, usually a figure of cold, predatory stillness, offers a rare, steadying embrace to the woman who led the castle's defence, providing a silent comfort as they survey the heavy price of their victory. Harry realises that Dumbledore's final test wasn't just about resisting the darkness, but about proving that a man could hold the ultimate power without being consumed by it. He chooses to keep the Elder Wand, not as a weapon of conquest, but as a silent guardian of the peace they bled for. The gnarled wood no longer feels like lead in his hand. It feels like a partner that finally knows its master. He is no longer the ghost of Privet Drive, or a pawn on the board of half-truths. He is a man who finally understands the difference between a tool and the hand that wields it. A soft footstep on the stone alerts him to Lydia's arrival. She joins him at the edge of the ledge, her presence a grounding force that feels more powerful than any enchantment he has ever witnessed. She doesn't need to speak, she simply stands with him as the light catches the silver of the Thames in his memory and the green of the Highlands before his eyes. Harry reflects on the metal box he once kept beneath the floorboards, filled with the meagre earnings of a street magician and the hope for a forged real life. He realises that the life he was saving for, one where he didn't have to be a ghost or a secret, has finally begun. He is no longer the orphan from St. Jude's, or a weapon in the making. He is simply Harry, a man who has finally found a home. And that is the story of the Boy Wonder. We started this journey with a 5-year-old boy alone in a cupboard, and we end it with a man standing on the battlements of a free world. This has been an incredible project to share with you all. As I mentioned before, I'll be heading back to some of our more standard what-ifs after this, but the world of the London Underground will always be a favourite of mine. If you have enjoyed this finale, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the wizarding world. And let me know in the comments, was this the ending you expected for the boy who lived? Thank you for riding with me through the tunnels. I'm Epic Ifs, and I'll see you in the next one.